From the window of my fourth-floor apartment, the world always looks too bright, too busy, too vividly alive. It is a cruel contrast to the winter that has settled permanently inside my chest. My name is Amelia, and at 78 years old, I have become a ghost in my own life, haunting a home that no longer holds the echo of laughter, only the sterile silence of a life that has outstayed its welcome. People often speak of old age as a golden era, a time of harvest and sweet repose, where one can sit back and admire the legacy they have built. What a pious, beautiful lie that is. For me, this season has not been a harvest, but a slow, agonizing dismantling of everything I once held sacred. It has been an erosion, a relentless weathering that has stripped away the soft soil of hope, leaving only the jagged, dry rock of a despair so profound it feels heavy in my veins. I wanted to give up, and I do not say this with the dramatic flair of youth, threatening to leave because of a trivial heartbreak. I say it with the deep, meditated conviction of a woman who has surveyed the rubble of her existence and found no reason to pick up a single stone to rebuild. 5 years ago, I lost my husband, my Santiago. When his heart stopped, the music of the world stopped with him. He took the color of the sky, the smell of wet earth after rain, and the warmth that made this apartment a home. But the grief for a husband is a natural pain, a wound that, while deep, is expected in the tragic contract of marriage. What broke me, what truly shattered the vessel of my soul, was not the death of my husband, but the rejection of the living. My children, the 3 lives I had nurtured with my own blood, sweat, and prayers, had not just drifted away, they had actively pushed me into the margins. They have their own lives, their own struggles, their own frantic clocks that tick a rhythm I can no longer follow. But it was more than busyness. It was a coldness that developed over the years, a subtle implication that I was a burden, an obligation that they were eager to shed. They left me in this apartment, comfortable and sunny, yes, but for me, it transformed into a gilded cage where the bars were made of memories that tortured me, and the luxury was nothing more than an imposed, deafening solitude. The rejection wasn't a single dramatic event. It was 1,000 small cuts. It was the Christmas dinner where I was seated at the end of the table, spoken over and ignored, as if I were a piece of furniture. It was the phone calls that became shorter, more impatient, until they stopped altogether. It was the realization that to my own flesh and blood, I had become invisible, a relic of a past they wanted to forget. This abandonment severed the last anchor I had, my faith. That faith, which my mother had taught me to grip with tooth and nail since the cradle, slipped from my fingers like fine, dry sand. It happened without screaming, without a dramatic crisis, just with an infinite, crushing weariness. How could I believe in a divine plan when the only visible plan was my own slow extinction? How could I believe in a Father in heaven when my family on earth had discarded me? The prayers I tried to whisper felt hollow, bouncing off the ceiling and falling back onto the floor like dead birds. The churches felt cold, museums of a God who had left the building long ago. The image of Christ on my bedroom wall seemed to look at me, not with compassion, but with the distant stare of a stranger who could not possibly understand the agony of being forgotten by those you birthed. I would reproach him in the silence of the night. Where were you, Lord, when my love faded in that hospital bed? Where were you when the house went silent? Where were you when my children stopped calling? Where were you when my own soul screamed for a sign and found only the echo of my own lament? I received no answer, only the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock, marking time toward a meaningless end. And so, in that silent surrender, in that absolute abandonment of hope, I made a decision. It was a Tuesday morning. I remember the pale sun trying to pierce through the dense fog that had settled over the city, a perfect metaphor for my spirit. I had prepared everything with the meticulousness that only someone who has accepted the end can possess. I paid every bill on the table, ensuring no debts were left behind. I wrote the letters, not of accusation, but of simple, cold farewell, and placed them in neat envelopes. The few pieces of jewelry I had left, the ones Santiago had given me, I placed in a velvet box for my granddaughter, Elena, though I doubted she would even know the stories behind them. I bathed and dressed in my best wool suit, the deep navy one Santiago had loved on our silver anniversary. It was a way to go with dignity, a final gesture of self-respect in a world that had offered me none. I was ready. The plan was set. I stood in the hallway of my apartment, my hand trembling slightly as it hovered over the doorknob. I was prepared to walk out, to leave this sanctuary of sorrow and face the cold finality I had chosen. My heart beat with a slow, heavy thud, a drum marching toward a cessation of hostilities. I was tired of fighting the silence. I was tired of the sharp pang of rejection every time I looked at the family photos on the mantel. I just wanted it to stop. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of old paper and lavender that permeated the room, ready to exhale it for the last time. I turned the handle. The latch clicked. The sound was loud in the empty apartment. I pulled the door open, ready to step into the abyss, to cross the threshold of no return. But then, I heard it. A tiny sound, almost imperceptible. It wasn't a shout, nor a cry for help, nor a siren. It was a hum, a melody, fragile and off-key, drifting up from the stairwell below. It was so out of place in this building of silent professionals and rushing tenants that it froze me in place. My foot, poised to take that final step, hovered in the air. I frowned, annoyed. Who dared to interrupt my private, solemn exit? Who dared to bring noise into my pact with darkness? The irritation flared, a spark of life I didn't want, but the sound persisted. It was a child's voice, a soft, broken humming of an old tune, something familiar, something ancient. It pulled at a memory I couldn't quite place, a song about a shepherd and a lost sheep. I should have ignored it. I should have walked past it and continued with my plan. But the sheer anomaly of it, the pure innocence of that sound against the backdrop of my grim determination, acted like a physical tether. I didn't step out to die. Instead, I stepped out to listen. I crept toward the railing of the landing, drawn by a force I couldn't name, looking down into the stairwell that spiraled into the shadows below. The humming grew slightly louder, a tiny beacon of life in the concrete throat of the building. I had to see the source of this interruption. I had to know what kind of creature could sing in a world as gray as this. I moved towards the sound, unaware that this small, annoying distraction was the first thread of a rope that was about to be thrown to a drowning woman. The decision to die was paused, held in suspension by a single wavering note. I moved closer to the door, drawn by the sheer anomaly of the sound. The song was an old tune, one of those lullabies that only grandmothers seem to remember, a melody woven from the threads of a simpler time. It spoke of a little shepherd and a lost sheep, a song I hadn't heard in decades, certainly not in this modern sterilized building where everyone lived with headphones on and eyes glued to screens. I pressed my eye to the peephole, feeling a sharp pang of guilt for my curiosity at such a transcendental moment. I was supposed to be leaving this world, yet here I was, spying on the hallway like a nosy neighbor. Through the distorted fisheye lens of the peephole, the world looked warped and distant, but the figure on the stairs was unmistakably clear. There he was, sitting on the highest step of the flight leading down, with his knees pulled tight against his chest and a winter coat that was at least 2 sizes too big for him. It was Mateo, the little boy from apartment 4B. I knew of him, of course. His mother, Inez, was a young single woman who worked double shifts at the city clinic. I had seen her rushing in and out, exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, dragging groceries and laundry. I had nodded to them in the elevator a few times with the polite, distant courtesy of a woman who wants to be left alone. Mateo couldn't have been more than 5 or 6 years old. He had messy brown hair that looked like it hadn't seen a comb in days, and eyes so large and dark they seemed to absorb all the dim light of the corridor. He had a sketchbook open on his knees and was furiously scribbling with a blue wax crayon. But the humming didn't stop. I stayed glued to the peephole, hypnotized. What I saw wasn't just a child playing, it was a profound stillness in the middle of chaos. He was waiting. I knew that look. He was a latchkey kid, waiting for a mother who was late again. But unlike me, who sat in my luxury apartment waiting for death, he wasn't despairing. He wasn't crying. There was a luminous self-sufficiency about him that contrasted violently with my own disintegration. He was occupied in his own creative world, in a bubble of music and blue wax, completely unbothered by the silence of the hallway. Then, it happened. The boy stopped humming abruptly. He lifted his crayon and looked at it with an expression of deep, philosophical concentration. Then, as if he had reached a monumental decision, he stood up. He took a tentative step toward my door. My breath hitched in my throat. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs. Not from fear of danger, but from the fear of intrusion. I wanted to scream at him to go away, to leave me to my final exit. I didn't want a witness. I didn't want a savior. But Matteo didn't knock. He didn't pound on the wood. In an act that was not a demand but a nervous caress, he touched the wood of my door softly. I stood paralyzed on the other side, the heavy wool of my suit feeling like armor that had suddenly become too tight. The boy didn't wait for an answer. He simply bent down, his small movements clumsy with the weight of his coat, and slid something under my door. Then he turned around and went back to his step, resuming his humming and his drawing with a Pascal naturalness, as if his mission had been completed and required no further follow-up. My decision, my farewell, my carefully plotted departure, all of it screeched to a halt, replaced by a childish and urgent curiosity. What had he pushed into my sanctuary? I knelt with difficulty, my old knees cracking in the silence, protesting the movement. My hand trembled as I reached for the piece of paper on the floor. It was a page torn from his notebook, folded with the imperfections of small hands. I unfolded it. It was a drawing, a crude, vibrant drawing in blue and yellow crayon. It depicted a figure, a round, enormous shape that I assumed was me, with a very serious expression, standing next to a smaller figure with messy hair. But dominating the page, in the upper corner, was a gigantic, disproportionate yellow sun. It wasn't the art that stopped my heart, though. It was the text written underneath in large, clumsy block letters. "You are not alone. The sun always comes back. Matteo." That simple phrase, that innocent affirmation from a 5-year-old boy about the mechanics of the celestial bodies and the nature of companionship hit me with the force of a physical blow. It was an unsolicited message, undeserved, arriving at the exact second of my capitulation. The universe, which I had sworn had abandoned me, had just used a 5-year-old messenger with scraped knees to deliver an ultimatum to my surrender. I stared at the paper, the blue wax waxy under my thumb. The sun always comes back. How could he know? How could he know that I felt surrounded by eternal night? How could he know that the darkness inside apartment 4C was so thick it was choking me? The faith that had vanished from my life didn't return with a celestial choir or a mystical vision. It didn't come with thunder or a burning bush. It came with the tangible evidence of a simple, unadulterated kindness from a stranger. He didn't know it, but he had just sabotaged my escape. He had forced me to confront something I no longer believed was possible, that someone saw me. My own children, the fruit of my womb, hadn't really seen me in years. They saw a burden, an obligation, a grandmother to send a card to. But this boy, this little stranger, had seen the shadow behind the door and decided to draw a sun for it. I remained on the floor, clutching the drawing to my chest for what felt like an hour. The humiliation of it burned. Here I was, Amelia, the matriarch who had survived wars and economic crises, disarmed by a crayon drawing. I felt foolish. The grand tragedy I had scripted for myself had been interrupted by a comedy of innocence. Slowly, painfully, I pulled myself up. I looked at my reflection in the hallway mirror. The navy wool suit, chosen for my funeral, now looked ridiculous. It looked like a costume for a play that had been canceled. My face was a mask of exhaustion, but in my eyes, for the first time in months, there was something other than the void. There was perplexity. There was a spark of confusion. And where there is confusion, there is life, because the dead are certain, but the living are full of questions. I didn't open the door to leave. I didn't open it to thank him either. I wasn't ready for that exposure yet. Instead, I turned around and walked to the kitchen. The apartment was silent, but the silence felt different now. It was no longer the silence of a tomb. It was the silence of a pause. I filled the kettle with water. The simple, mundane act of preparing to boil water felt revolutionary. I was engaging with the future, even if that future was only 5 minutes away when the whistle would blow. I sat at my dining table, placed the drawing in the center, and stared at it. I didn't cry for my husband that day. I cried for myself. I cried for the woman who had allowed herself to wither so completely that she almost missed the sun. But the doubt was a tenacious weed. Was this just a random act? Was I reading meaning into a child's boredom? I clung to that doubt because it was safer than hope. Hope is dangerous. Hope hurts. But as the smell of coffee began to fill the room, pushing away the stale scent of my depression, I knew I couldn't go back to the plan. Not today. The boy was still out there, humming. And as long as he was humming, I couldn't leave. The story hadn't ended. It had just been rewritten by a blue crayon. I needed to know why. I needed to understand this child. And that need became the first beat of my new heart. Waking up the next morning felt like a clerical error in the book of life. I opened my eyes to the same crack in the ceiling, the same gray light filtering through the heavy curtains, the same persistent ache in my joints. By all accounts, I shouldn't have been there. I should have been a memory, a tragic footnote in the family history, a problem solved. But instead, I was breathing. The air in the room felt heavy, recycled. But as I turned my head, my eyes landed on the nightstand. There it was, the crumpled piece of notebook paper with the waxy yellow sun. In the harsh light of day, the drawing looked even more amateurish, more chaotic. But the message remained stubbornly clear. The sun always comes back. I stared at it for a long time, feeling a strange cocktail of resentment and curiosity. Resentment because my escape had been thwarted by a platitude. Curiosity because, against my will, I wondered if the boy was back on the stairs. I moved through the morning like a sleepwalker. I drank my tea, but it tasted different, sharper perhaps. The silence of the apartment, usually a suffocating blanket, now felt charged with a waiting energy. I found myself glancing at the clock every few minutes. 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. The time when the school bus dropped the neighborhood children off. My heart began to beat with a rhythm that wasn't fear, but anticipation. Why did I care? I was an old woman who had been ready to check out of this hotel. Why was I suddenly concerned with the guest in the hallway? But at 3:30, right on schedule, I heard it. The heavy thud of the building's front door downstairs, the scuff of small shoes on the stairs. The elevator was broken again, a chronic ailment of our building. And then, the humming. That off-key wandering melody that drifted through the gap under my door like smoke. I stood in the middle of my living room, wringing my hands. I couldn't just stand there. The day before, he had reached out to me. The social contract, even for a recluse like me, demanded a response. I walked into the kitchen. It was a pristine, unused space. I hadn't cooked a real meal since Santiago died. I survived on toast and canned soup. But today, my hands sought something else. I opened the pantry, a bag of flour, half empty but sealed. Sugar. A jar of chocolate chips that had likely expired 6 months ago. It didn't matter. I needed to do something with my hands other than wring them in despair. I began to bake. The mechanical action of measuring, stirring, and kneading was a forgotten language my body remembered instantly. As the oven warmed, the scent of melting chocolate and vanilla extract began to battle the smell of old dust and lavender. It was the smell of life. It was the smell of a mother, a role I thought I had retired from. When the cookies were done, cooling on a rack, I placed 3 of them on a paper napkin. I didn't have fancy china anymore. I had packed it all away for the inheritance I thought I was leaving. I walked to the door, took a deep breath, and opened it. The hallway was dim, illuminated only by the flickering fluorescent bulb that the super never fixed. Mateo was there, exactly as he had been yesterday, curled up on the top step, his back against the railing, sketchbook on his knees. He jumped slightly when the latch clicked, his big dark eyes snapping up to meet mine. He looked terrified for a second, as if he expected the witch from a fairy tale to emerge. I didn't mean to be loud," he stammered, pulling his knees tighter to his chest. "You weren't loud," I said, my voice raspy from disuse. I cleared my throat and tried to summon a softness I hadn't felt in years. "You were consistent." I held out the napkin. "I made cookies. I can't eat them all. They're bad for my sugar. That was a lie. I didn't have diabetes, I had a broken heart. But it was a safe lie, a grandmotherly lie. Mateo looked at the cookies, then at me, then back at the cookies. The war between caution and hunger was brief and decisive. He stood up, approached slowly, and took the napkin with a reverence that made my chest ache. "Thank you," he whispered. "Are they chocolate?" "They are," I said, leaning against the doorframe. I didn't invite him in. That would be too much. "I wanted to thank you for the drawing. The sun." He took a bite, closing his eyes in bliss, ignoring the crumbs falling onto his oversized coat. "Oh, you liked it. Mom says I draw the sun too big. She says it takes up too much room on the paper." "Your mother is wrong," I said, surprising myself with the firmness of my tone. "Sometimes the sun needs to be big to burn off the fog." He chewed thoughtfully, looking up at me with an intensity that made me want to look away. "You looked sad yesterday," he said matter-of-factly. Children have no use for euphemisms. "Like my dad looked before he went away." The air left my lungs. "Your dad went away?" "Yeah, 2 Christmases ago. He said he needed to find himself." Mateo shrugged, a gesture so heavy for such small shoulders. "I don't know where he went to look, but Mom cries sometimes at night. She thinks I'm asleep, but I hear her. That's why I wait here." "Why here?" I asked, genuinely confused. "Why not inside your apartment?" "Because," he gestured to the stairwell. "This is the first place you can see the elevator or the stairs. When she comes home, I want to be the first face she sees, so she knows she's not alone. If she sees me first, maybe she won't cry." The words hit me like a physical blow to the solar plexus. Here was a 5-year-old boy, abandoned by a father, living with a struggling mother, taking on the emotional burden of being the lighthouse for his parent. He sat in a cold, drafty hallway for hours just to give his mother a smile before she walked into the emptiness of their home. I felt a wave of shame so hot it burned my cheeks. I had been sitting inside, mourning the fact that my children didn't come to me, didn't call me, didn't validate me. I was consumed by what I wasn't receiving. And here was this child, completely focused on what he could give. "That is a very brave thing to do, Mateo," I managed to say, my voice trembling. "It's not brave," he said, finishing the first cookie. "It's just family. That's what Mom says. Family holds the door open. Family holds the door open." The phrase echoed in the corridor. My family hadn't held the door open for me. They had slammed it shut. But as I looked at Mateo, wiping chocolate from his mouth with the back of his hand, I realized something profound was shifting in my tectonic plates. I had been asking God to fix my family, to make them love me again. I had been the victim. But looking at this boy, I saw a reflection of a love that didn't ask, a love that waited on cold stairs. "Does she come home late?" I asked. "Usually when the streetlights come on," he said, looking at the small window at the end of the hall. "She works at the hospital. She fixes people. She's lucky to have you waiting," I said. And I meant it. I found myself wanting to stay there, in the drafty hallway, just to see this reunion. I wanted to witness the moment the sun came back for him. "You can wait with me," he offered, as if reading my mind. "If you're lonely." My dad said lonely people should stick together. That's how they make a crowd. I looked back into my apartment. It was warm, safe, and filled with the ghosts of my self-pity. Then I looked at the concrete step next to Mateo. It was hard, cold, and uncomfortable. "I'll wait for a little bit," I said. I stepped out of my apartment and pulled the door shut. I didn't sit on the floor. My hips wouldn't allow it, but I leaned against the wall next to him. For the next hour, we didn't speak much. He told me about school, about a bully named Jason who stole erasers, about how blue is the fastest color. I listened. For the first time in 10 years, I wasn't listening to respond or to judge. I was listening to connect. I was forgetting myself. And in that forgetting, the heavy stone in my chest began to crack. I didn't know it then, but God was using this boy to perform open-heart surgery on me, without anesthesia, right there in the hallway of an apartment building in Queens. The lesson wasn't about forgiveness yet. It was about vision. I had to learn to see again before I could learn to forgive. And as the sun began to set outside, casting long orange shadows across the linoleum floor, I realized I wasn't waiting for death anymore. I was waiting for Inez. I was waiting to see what love looked like when it walked through the door. The moment the elevator doors finally rattled open, spilling a sliver of yellow light into our dim hallway, the air changed. It was Inez. She looked exactly as I had imagined, worn down by the friction of the world, her nurse's scrubs slightly wrinkled, a heavy tote bag digging into her shoulder. She looked like a woman running on fumes, her eyes fixed on the floor as she stepped out, carrying the weight of 12 hours of caring for strangers. But then, she looked up. She saw Mateo, and the transformation was instantaneous and miraculous. It was as if someone had flipped a switch inside her soul. The exhaustion melted from her face, replaced by a radiance that made her look 10 years younger. She didn't walk. She dropped her bag and ran the few steps to him, scooping him up despite his size, burying her face in his messy hair. "My little watchman," she murmured, her voice thick with a love so palpable it felt like a third person in the room. "You waited." "I always wait," Mateo mumbled into her shoulder, his small hands clutching her back. I stood there, pressed against the wall, feeling like an intruder in a holy sanctuary. I was witnessing a communion I had been starved of for decades. Inez pulled back, kissing his forehead, and then her eyes landed on me. For a second, confusion clouded her face. The old woman from 4C, the ghost who never spoke, standing in the hallway. But then she saw the cookie crumbs on Mateo's face and the empty napkin in his hand. Her expression softened into a gratitude that broke my heart. "Mrs. Amelia?" she asked, breathless. "Did you stay with him?" I had some free time," I stammered, lying again. I had nothing but free time. "We shared some cookies." "Thank you," she said, and she reached out and squeezed my hand. Her skin was rough from sanitizer, but her touch was warm. "Thank you for keeping him company. It scares me, him being out here alone." I nodded, unable to speak, and watched them retreat into apartment 4B. The door closed, and the sound of their muffled laughter faded. I turned back to my own door, entering the silence of apartment 4C. But that night, the silence was different. It wasn't empty. It was loud with questions. I sat in my armchair, looking at the photos of my children, David, Sarah, and Michael. The contrast between Inez's reunion with Mateo and my own reality was a blade twisting in my gut. Why didn't they look at me like that? Why was I a burden when Mateo was a prize? The bitterness, which I had momentarily forgotten in the hallway, came rushing back, acidic and hot. I had given them everything: my youth, my dreams, my money. And in return, I got silence. The hallway meetings became our ritual. Every afternoon at 3:30, I would open my door. I even brought out a small folding chair so my knees wouldn't scream. We created a strange, intergenerational ecosystem. I brought snacks, slices of apple, juice boxes, more cookies, and he brought his drawings and his philosophy. But while my heart was thawing toward the boy, it was hardening toward my own blood. The more I loved Mateo, the more I resented my children for not letting me love them. It was a paradox that was tearing me apart. I was learning to be a grandmother again, but to the wrong child. Then came the letter. It was a Wednesday, 2 weeks after our first meeting. The mailman delivered a sleek, white envelope with a return address in Chicago. It was from my eldest son, David. My hands shook as I tore it open, a foolish flicker of hope igniting in my chest. Maybe he sensed something. Maybe he was writing to say he missed me, that he was coming to visit. I pulled out the single sheet of paper. It wasn't a letter. It was a legal notification regarding the transfer of a small trust fund Santiago had set up. Attached was a yellow sticky note with David's handwriting. "Mom, sign the highlighted line and mail back ASAP. Hope you're good. Dave." Hope you're good. Dave. 5 words. No love. No mom, how are you? No, I miss dad. Just a transactional command and a generic sign-off. I stared at the paper until the words blurred. The pain was blinding. It wasn't just sadness. It was a fury so white-hot it made me dizzy. I crumpled the paper, threw it across the room, and let out a scream that scraped my throat. "I am not a transaction," I yelled at the empty walls. "I am your mother." The rejection was absolute. They didn't hate me. That would have required passion. They were indifferent to me. I was just paperwork to them, I was still vibrating with rage when 3:30 came. I almost didn't go out. I didn't want Matteo to see me like this, broken, venomous, ugly with resentment. But the habit was stronger than the anger. I grabbed the bag of pretzels I had bought and marched out. I slammed my chair open and sat down heavily. Matteo looked up from his sketchbook, startled by my aggression. He sensed the storm immediately. "You have storm clouds on your face, Amelia," he said quietly. He had stopped calling me Mrs. a few days ago. We were past formalities. "I have reasons for storm clouds," I snapped, harsher than I intended. I ripped open the pretzel bag. "My son wrote to me today." "That's good, isn't it?" Matteo asked, tilting his head. "You always look at his picture." "It's not good when the letter is empty," I said, struggling to explain the nuance of adult cruelty to a child. "He doesn't care, Matteo. He just wants a signature. He doesn't care if I'm alive or dead as long as the paperwork is filed." I looked at the boy, and the bitterness spilled over. "You know what? Families are overrated. They take pieces of you and leave you empty. You're lucky your dad left early. At least you don't have to pretend." It was a cruel thing to say. Horrible. As soon as the words left my mouth, I wanted to swallow them back. I had just used a child's trauma to validate my own anger. I waited for him to cry, to run away. But Matteo didn't flinch. He put his crayon down. He was drawing a green ocean today and looked at me with that unnerving, ancient gaze. "My dad didn't leave early," he said softly. "He just got lost. Mom says his heart got too heavy to carry us." "And you forgive him?" I challenged, my voice trembling. "He left you, Matteo. He left you in this hallway. How can you sit there and draw pictures and not hate him?" "I hate my children right now. I hate them for leaving me." There, I had said it. The ugly truth. Matteo looked at his drawing, tracing the waves with his finger. "I tried being mad once," he said, "when he missed my birthday. I was really mad. I screamed, and I threw my favorite car against the wall and it broke." He looked up at me. "Being mad is like holding onto a cactus. You think you're going to throw it at them, but you're the only one whose hands are bleeding." I stared at him. The hallway went silent, save for the distant hum of the city. Holding onto a cactus. "If I hate him," Matteo continued, his logic piercingly simple, "then I have to carry him around all day in my head. And he's heavy. I don't want to carry him. I want to draw. I can't draw if my hands are full of cactus." He picked up a pretzel and crunched it loudly. "You should put the cactus down, Amelia. It's making your face look wrinkly." I sat there, stunned, stripped bare by a 5-year-old's theology. I was holding onto the cactus. I was gripping the indifference of my children so tightly that I was bleeding out, and I had convinced myself that my bleeding was a form of punishment for them. But they didn't feel it. David in Chicago didn't feel my anger. He was eating dinner, watching TV, living his life. I was the only one bleeding. I was the only one in the hallway with wounded hands. "But how?" I whispered, my voice cracking. "How do you put it down when it hurts so much?" Matteo shrugged, as if the answer was obvious. "You just open your hand," he said, "and then you draw something else, like a sun or a dinosaur. God likes dinosaurs." I looked at my hands. They were clenched into fists in my lap. Slowly, consciously, I uncurled my fingers. The tension in my forearms released. The anger didn't vanish. It wasn't magic, but the agonizing grip loosened. This boy, who had every reason to be bitter, had chosen freedom. He had chosen to protect his own heart, not by building walls, but by refusing to carry the weight of someone else's failure. God was speaking to me. I knew it then. He wasn't speaking through scripture or a sermon. He was speaking through the absurdity of a child comparing forgiveness to a cactus. The path to peace wasn't about getting my children to apologize. It was about me deciding to stop bleeding for them. It was the first step toward the hardest thing I would ever have to do: forgive the unforgivable silence. That night, I stared at the blank check for the trust fund transfer. My pen hovered over the signature line, the same pen I had used to write furious drafts of letters I never sent, letters filled with venom and accusation. But Matteo's voice echoed in the quiet room, bouncing off the walls of my resentment. "You're the only one whose hands are bleeding." I looked at my hands. They were old, spotted with age, the skin like parchment paper. They had held babies, scrubbed floors, planted gardens, and held the hand of a dying husband. Why was I using them now to strangle a ghost? I signed the check. I didn't add a note. I didn't write, "You are an ungrateful son." I didn't write, "I hope you choke on this money." I simply signed Amelia. It was just a name. It was just a signature. I put it in the envelope, sealed it, and placed it by the door. And as I did, I felt a physical sensation of lightness, as if I had just set down a heavy suitcase I had been carrying for 5 years. I wasn't forgiving David because he deserved it. I was forgiving him because I deserved peace. 2 days later, the sky turned a bruised, angry purple. A summer storm was brewing, the kind that turns the city into a drum. The air pressure dropped so low I could feel it in my knees. By 3 o'clock, the rain was lashing against the windows in horizontal sheets, and the wind was howling through the ventilation shafts like a trapped animal. I knew Inez was working a double shift. She had told me in the elevator that morning, her eyes apologetic. "Mateo has his coloring books," she had said. "He'll be fine." But as the thunder cracked, shaking the foundations of the building, I couldn't sit still. The hallway was drafty on a good day. In this storm, it would be a wind tunnel. I opened my door. The hallway was plunged in darkness. The storm had knocked out the weak fluorescent light. A jagged flash of lightning illuminated the stairwell for a split second, revealing a terrifying tableau. Mateo wasn't sitting on his usual step. He was curled into a tight ball in the corner, his hands over his ears. His sketchbook abandoned on the floor, pages fluttering violently in the draft. He was shaking so hard his teeth were chattering. The brave watchman had been broken by the thunder. "Mateo," I called out, my voice struggling against the roar of the wind. He looked up, his face wet, not with rain, but with tears. "The sky is breaking," he screamed, terrified. "It's breaking like the car." I didn't think. I didn't calculate the risk of intimacy. I didn't worry about my pristine carpets or the sanctity of my solitude. I stepped out, grabbed his arm, and pulled him up. "Get inside," I commanded, my voice cutting through his panic. "Now!" He didn't resist. He scrambled over the threshold of apartment 4C, and I slammed the door shut against the gale, locking out the chaos. The silence in my apartment was sudden and absolute. The storm raged outside, impotent against the double-paned glass. Mateo stood in the center of my living room, dripping wet, his eyes darting around the space he had never seen. He looked at the velvet curtains, the antique clock, the oil paintings. To him, it must have looked like a palace. To me, it had been a mausoleum. Now, with a wet, shivering boy in the center of the Persian rug, it finally looked like a home again. "Is it safe here?" he whispered, wiping his nose on his sleeve. "It is the safest place in the world," I lied. Or maybe I wasn't lying anymore. "Come here. You're freezing." I took him to the bathroom and found a fluffy towel, one of the guest towels that hadn't been touched in a decade. I dried his hair, rubbing vigorously to get the warmth back into him. He stood still, letting me care for him, surrendering to the mothering I had suppressed for so long. I made him hot cocoa, real cocoa, with milk and the last of the chocolate chips melted in, and sat him in Santiago's big leather armchair. He looked tiny in it, a small king on a massive throne. "This is a good chair," he said, his voice returning to normal as the cocoa warmed his belly. "It smells like old books." "It was my husband's," I said, sitting opposite him. He loved old books. Mateo looked around, and his eyes landed on the mantelpiece, where the framed photos of David, Sarah, and Michael stood in a rigid row. "Are those your cactus people?" he asked innocently. The question caught me off guard, and I almost laughed. "Yes," I sighed, looking at the smiling faces of the children who had forgotten me. "Those are my cactus people. They look nice in the pictures," he observed. "Whatever makes them prickly must be on the inside." "That is a very wise observation," I said. I looked at David's photo. For the first time, I didn't feel the stab of anger. I felt a dull, distant ache, like an old scar that only hurts when it rains. "I mailed the letter, Mateo. I put the cactus down." He smiled, a chocolate mustache on his upper lip. "Does your hand feel better?" "It does," I admitted. "But now my hand feels empty." "That's okay," Mateo said, reaching out and grabbing my hand. His small, warm fingers wrapped around my arthritis-swollen ones. "You can hold my hand until you find something else." We sat there for an hour, the storm battering the building, while inside, a different kind of storm was quieting down. I told him stories about Santiago, about how he used to dance in the kitchen while cooking pasta. Matteo told me about his dream of owning a dog named Thunder so he wouldn't be scared of the noise anymore. It was the most normal, beautiful conversation I had had in years. Then the lights flickered and died. The apartment plunged into gray gloom. Matteo gasped, his grip on my hand tightening. "Amelia, it's just the power," I soothed him, though my own heart rate spiked. "Stay there. I have candles." I fumbled in the drawer, finding the emergency candles. I lit 3 of them, placing them on the coffee table. The flickering flame cast long, dancing shadows on the walls. The atmosphere shifted from cozy to sacred. In the candlelight, Matteo's face looked solemn. "Amelia," he whispered, "do you think God is mad at us? Is that why he's yelling?" He pointed at the window as thunder rattled the glass. I sat back down, looking at the boy. A week ago, I would have said yes. I would have said God is angry or cruel or indifferent. But looking at this child, who had saved me from suicide with a crayon drawing, I couldn't say that. "No, Matteo," I said firmly. "God isn't yelling. He's just rearranging the furniture in the sky. Sometimes things have to get messy before they get clear." "Like my room?" "Exactly like your room." "Can we ask him to be quiet?" he asked. "My mom is out there. I don't want her to get wet." "We can ask," I said. I hadn't prayed in 5 years. My prayers had died in the hospital room with Santiago. But now I closed my eyes. "Lord," I started, my voice rusty. "We aren't asking for much. Just keep Inez safe, clear the road for her, and please calm the storm in the sky and the one in our hearts." "Amen, amen," Matteo whispered. At that exact moment, the sound of a key turning in a lock echoed. Not my lock, but the one next door. Then, a frantic pounding on my door. "Amelia! Amelia!" It was Inez. I hurried to open it. She was drenched, her hair plastered to her skull, her eyes wide with panic. "Is he here? Is Matteo here?" "Mom!" Matteo jumped from the chair and ran to her. Inez fell to her knees in my doorway, embracing him, sobbing with relief. "Oh, thank God. I came home and the hallway was dark, and you weren't on the stairs. I thought—" She looked up at me, mascara running down her cheeks. "Thank you. Thank you for taking him in. He is welcome any time," I said, and I meant it. He kept me safe from the storm. Inez looked at me, confused but grateful. She stood up, holding Matteo's hand. "We should go. I need to get him into dry clothes. I don't know how to repay you." "You don't owe me anything," I said. "Go." They left, the warmth of the apartment leaving with them. I closed the door and blew out the candles. The power was still out, but I didn't mind the dark anymore. I felt a deep, resonant peace. I had been useful. I had been a mother again, if only for an hour. I navigated the dark living room by memory, heading toward my bedroom. And then, in the darkness, my landline phone rang. The sound was shocking, a shrill scream in the silence. Nobody called the landline, telemarketers maybe, or a wrong number. I hesitated, let it ring. But something, an intuition, a pull, made me pick it up. "Hello?" There was a pause, a static crackle. And then, a voice I hadn't heard in 3 years. A voice that sounded small, broken, and terrified. "Mom?" It was Sarah, my daughter, the one who hadn't invited me to her wedding because it was a small, intimate gathering. "Sarah?" I whispered, clutching the receiver. "Mom, Her voice broke into a sob. "I didn't know who else to call. David said you wrote to him. Mom, something terrible has happened. I'm at the hospital. It's my daughter. It's Elena." The floor seemed to drop out from under me. Elena, my granddaughter, the one whose inheritance I had packed in a velvet box. "What happened?" I asked, the mother in me taking over instantly, the resentment of years vaporized by the heat of her panic. "She's sick, Mom, really sick. Doctors don't know. I'm all alone here. Mark is away on business. I'm scared, Mom. I'm so scared." I stood in the dark, the phone pressed to my ear. The cactus was gone. My hands were empty, and now God was putting something else in them. Not a drawing, not a cookie, but a second chance. "Tell me where you are," I said, my voice steady as a rock. "I'm coming." The taxi ride to the hospital was a blur, a chaotic blur of rain-slicked streets and flashing streetlights. Yet amidst the rush, I felt an almost supernatural calm. The panic in Sarah's voice had done what years of silence couldn't. It had shattered the prison of my self-pity. My own pain, my rejection, the sting of David's cold letter, all of it seemed trivial, dwarfed by the primal fear of a mother for her child. That fear was a universal solvent, washing away all the accumulated bitterness of years. I was no longer Amelia the rejected widow. I was Amelia the grandmother, summoned to the field of battle. I was a tool, ready to be used. And in that willingness, I realized God hadn't abandoned me. He had simply been waiting for me to put down my weapon, the cactus of my anger, so my hands would be free to comfort. When the taxi screeched to a halt outside the monolithic structure of the city hospital, I barely waited for the driver to stop. The air inside was thick with the scent of disinfectant, stale coffee, and unspoken dread. I found Sarah in the waiting area of the pediatric ICU. She was a ghost of the vibrant woman I remembered. Her usually perfect hair was a mess, her eyes were bloodshot, and she was pacing a tight circuit in the corner, clutching a disposable paper cup that had long gone cold. When she saw me, her composure shattered completely. She didn't offer a polite hello or a cautious hug. She collapsed into my arms, weeping with a depth of despair I recognized instantly. This was the raw, guttural cry of a soul that has hit rock bottom. I held her, rocking her gently, smoothing her hair, whispering the same senseless, comforting sounds I had whispered to her when she was 5 and scraped her knee. I didn't ask about the last 3 years. I didn't mention the forgotten birthdays or the unanswered calls. I didn't mention the wedding invitation that never came. I simply held her, allowing my presence to be the sole message. I am here. You are not alone. "Mom, I'm so sorry," she choked out, her voice muffled against my shoulder. "I'm so sorry we left you. I was so busy, so selfish. I couldn't face you. I couldn't face the judgment." Judgment. That was the word. She hadn't shunned me out of hate, but out of fear of my judgment. They hadn't rejected me. They were running from their own guilt. The realization hit me with crystalline clarity. My children were carrying their own heavy burden, the weight of modern ambition, the crushing pressure of career and finance, and the guilt of neglecting the past. And I, in my self-pity, had stood rigid as a statue, demanding that they crawl back on their knees, rather than just extending a hand. "There is nothing to be sorry for, my love," I said, pulling back slightly to look into her eyes. "There is only Elena right now. We need to be strong for her. Tell me everything." She led me to the window of Elena's room. My beautiful granddaughter, lying small and pale under the harsh hospital lights, tubes and wires running everywhere. It was a terrifying sight, the very embodiment of life held captive by technology. I watched Elena's chest rise and fall, the fragile beat of her life being monitored by machinery. The fear was immense, but it was countered by an equally immense sense of purpose. I was needed. For the next 48 hours, I stayed by Sarah's side. I didn't just sit. I became the anchor. I forced Sarah to eat. I negotiated with nurses. I spoke to the doctors with the clarity and firmness of a woman who has nothing left to lose. I held Elena's tiny, cold hand, and I prayed. Not the stiff, formal prayers of my youth, but raw, unfiltered conversations with God, asking Him not to take this precious, fragile life. I was praying for Elena, but I was also praying for Sarah and for myself, asking for the strength to receive the love that was being offered to me. Finally, in this dark hour. It was during the long, silent hours of the second night, sitting by Elena's bedside while Sarah slept fitfully in an uncomfortable chair, that the true meaning of the title, "God Showed Me the Value of Forgiveness," was revealed. Forgiveness wasn't just releasing my children from my anger, it was accepting their imperfection. It was understanding that their failure to call wasn't a malicious act designed to hurt me, but a desperate cry from people drowning in their own lives. God had used my suicidal despair, the intervention of a child with a blue crayon, and finally, this terrifying crisis to break my heart open. He didn't send a miracle to make my children call. He sent a tragedy to make me answer. The value of forgiveness was not that it healed them, but that it resurrected me. And then, the miracle. Slowly, gently, Elena began to turn the corner. Her fever broke, her color returned. The doctors were cautious but optimistic. The danger had passed. When Elena finally opened her eyes and asked for a specific brand of strawberry yogurt, Sarah dissolved into tears of overwhelming relief. And then she looked at me, her mother, her lifeline, and she didn't see the judgmental matriarch of the past. She saw the woman who had held her together when she was falling apart. My sons, David and Michael, flew in. The atmosphere was strained initially, but the focus on Elena was the necessary buffer. There were tearful apologies, yes, mumbled and clumsy, but they didn't matter. What mattered was the touch, the way David wrapped his arm around my shoulder, the way Michael instinctively brought me coffee without having to ask. The family was broken, but it was putting itself back together, not perfectly, but functionally, with me no longer standing outside the door, but firmly inside the circle. 3 weeks later, I returned home. The apartment was still quiet, but it was no longer a mausoleum. It felt like a port of call. I called Inez from the lobby. "We're coming up," she said. When I stepped off the elevator, the hallway light was still broken, but the gloom didn't touch me. Matteo was waiting, perched on his chair, his sketchbook on his knees. He looked up, his face radiating light. "You're back, Amelia," he announced, running to me and giving me a tight hug that smelled of soap and pencil shavings. "I'm back, Matteo," I said, hugging him tightly. "And the sun is shining." "Did your cactus people get better?" he asked, looking at my hands. "They got better," I confirmed. "And my hands are completely empty now. I forgave them." He nodded sagely. "Good. Now you can draw something better." And he was right. I didn't need to carry the weight of my past anymore. My children were imperfect, and I was imperfect, and that was the true lesson of love. God had used a child's pure heart and a mother's terror to show me that forgiveness is the simple, life-saving act of choosing to draw the sun again, even after a storm. I wasn't waiting for death anymore. I was waiting for Matteo every afternoon, and now I was also waiting for the calls from my children, not with desperate expectation, but with quiet, open-hearted welcome. I was 78 years old, and my life, saved by a single blue crayon, had just begun. The pain of rejection lingers sometimes, a ghost of an old ache, but it no longer defines me. I know now that the rejection wasn't the end of my story. It was the prologue to my redemption. And for that gift of seeing, for the grace of being broken open by a child's love so that I could finally let go, I will be eternally grateful. I pray now, every day, in the stillness of my apartment, no longer asking God why He left me, but thanking Him for showing me how to let others, even my own family, be perfectly imperfect so that I could finally be free. The sun always comes back.